Welcome everyone, Questini here with a discussion about World of Warcraft, the Burning Crusade Classic, to talk about Protection Paladins and the talent builds that you will want to go for when playing one. There is a cookie cutter build that pretty much everyone will want to have for pretty much 90% of the game, but then there are certain choices you will want to make, dependent on the situation. If you're speedrunning, if you're against a specific boss or against certain trash waves, you might want to make some different choices. So I want to talk about that and go into the details. Now, when it comes to TBC talents, as a prop paladin, there are obviously things you will want to have regardless of what you do. And these are 5 points in Redoubt. It's not that great for single target. It's useful, very useful for AoE tanking because it significantly reduces the damage you're taking, but really you're taking 5 points in Redoubt for the sake of shield specialization. So 5 points Redoubt, 5 points in toughness for 10% armor, 5 points in anticipation for defense. So the avoidance is really useful, crit cap is very useful. You might feel you won't need it that much down the line, but it's still pretty important to have it. 3 points shield specialization, 3 points improve righteous fury, 1 point blessing of sanctuary, you have to get that to unlock holy shield. Then 2 points in spell warding. Here I want to explain that spell warding is a very important and crucial talent that some people underestimate because they think, oh, it's only 4% damage reduction from spells, why should I bother when I can get more use out of some other talents. Here's what I would say. In my experience as a tank, dealing with tanks that have spell damage reduction versus tanks that don't, it's an enormous difference. Druid tanks, for instance, they have no spell damage reduction. So they take 10% more damage from spells or from elementals than paladins, 16% more damage versus warriors. Now, you might think that's not significant, but it actually ends up being enormously so. When dealing with Paladin, for instance, one of the experiences that I had over and over again with Druid tanks and other guilds have had is that it was not uncommon to see Druids actually struggling the most when it came to their survivability against the Paladin adds, which is pure spell damage. And you also have mobs, trash, bosses that also have very powerful spells that they can do against you. Never underestimate that. If it was 4% physical damage, yeah, I would say that's not too significant. But that 4% spell damage is important. You'll still be lower than a warrior, but it is still a benefit. Like, here's the difference. You as a paladin, if you have this, you will not struggle as much as a druid will when it comes to any resistance fight or any spell damage taken. Druids will. So many times I've seen druids getting one shot or getting smacked in the face on Paladin in particular. It wasn't even funny. So 2 points in spell warding. Then you have a choice, really. 99% of the times you'll want to go for Blessing of Kings. Obviously, for 5-man, for 10-man raiding situation, and even for 25-man raiding situation, you will probably be the one doing Kings. For instance, a Red Paladin might want to go for Improved Lay on Hand, so he would skip Kings. The Holy Paladin would want to do Improved Blessing of Wisdom and Improved Blessing of Might. So you having Kings really suits the raid very well. It's optimal. But there are some situations where you can drop Kings and go for 1 point in Reckoning. Now, it's not going to be that much, but when you're tanking a lot of mobs, it can help you get some extra aggro on a single target, and that can be useful. Like the skull target gets some extra aggro. It can be useful in that kind of context. So consider that, but very, very rarely. Anyway, so 1 point of Kings is what you do in 99% of situations. Then 5 points in one-handed weapon specialization, which is 5% extra damage when you are using a one-handed weapon, including spell damage. So all your abilities will do 5% extra damage. This is enormously important. Sacred Duty, 6% extra stamina, flat out. Holy Shield, improve Holy Shield. And then 5 points in combat expertise. So what you're getting from combat expertise and Sacred Duty is 16% extra stamina, which is very, very high. It's much higher, actually, than warriors. You will start with lower HP than they do, but you scale much better with stamina than they do. So those are the essential talents in protection. You want to get combat expertise. You want to get Holy Shield that improves Holy Shield. You want to get Sacred Duty, all that. Then you spend 5 points in Benediction for the mana cost reduction of Judgment and Seal. It might not seem like a lot, but you will actually struggle quite a lot with mana, especially early on. 5 points in Deflection, critically important. And 2 points in Improved Judgment. And you're left with 9 points. Well, for the cookie cutter build, my recommendation would be 1 point in Avenger Shield, 5 points in Ardent Defender. Now, why does Avenger Shield matter? Avenger Shield matters because it's a ranged pull ability that's one of your higher burst abilities. Exorcism will do more, but Exorcism can't be used unless it's an undead or demon. Avenger Shield can be used on anything, and it's higher burst threat than Judgment. In all the years that I've tanked in World of Warcraft, one thing always stands out. Your burst threat is your most important threat. Your sustained threat, your threat per second, is also very significant, but being able to do a lot of threat early on is far more so. So having Avenger Shield, popping wings, doing an Avenger Shield, doing a Judgment is an enormous amount of threat. Even with Avenger Shield, though, you won't be able to beat, say, a warrior who's doing a shield slam on a target. That's an enormous amount of threat in its own right, but you will at least be able to compete. If you don't have it, you will suffer in many situations. As for Ardent Defender, now Ardent Defender is basically a passive shield wall when you're below 35% HP. So when you get below that, you take 30% less damage. Now, quite a lot of people think, oh, this is useless because I barely use it, it barely procs, it barely saves my life. Yes, there are many situations in which Ardent Defender is not great. Here's where it really does matter. In 5-mans, normals, heroics, and in raiding when tanking a lot of mobs. Because a lot of mobs, if you're AoE tanking a lot of mobs, many of them won't do that much damage under individual hits. But since you're tanking so many, you can drop to low HP. And that's where Ardent Defender is enormously useful. Because it helps keep you up, it makes you more stable to heal. And having a stability as a tank is actually very important. It's what healers like. So this is an enormously powerful talent to have in many tanking situations, especially when you're starting. Always focus on survivability first off, then worry about threat. And then after that, you get 3 points left. Where should you spend those 3 points? Well, you have Precision for 3% melee and spell hit. So this would affect Avenger Shield, Exorcism, Judgment. It would matter. So that's a bit of a threat bonus. Not too significant, but it is a threat bonus. Or you can spend them and improve Seal of the Crusader, which you would want to use if you don't have a Red Paladin, and chances are in a 5-man and Karazhan you won't have one, maybe even in 25-man raiding. You would use Seal of Crusader whenever you're tanking someone, and keeping that 3% crit is significant. Or you can spend them in Pursuit of Justice. Most of the time, I personally prefer to spend them in Precision, but you do have that flexibility. And this would be like the cookie cutter Protection Paladin build. 49 points in Protection, 12 points in Retribution, or you can take these 40 points out, keep them flexible, decide what you want. So 46 points in Protection, 12 points in Retribution with 3 points to spend. This is one of the talent builds that you can use. And this is the one I'd recommend people start out with. And then as they get more comfortable with survivability, with their raid, once threat becomes a bigger issue, then they can make some changes. And this is where I bring up, I guess you could say, a cautionary tale. There's a lot of people who think, oh, my threat is going to be garbage if I focus on survivability. Yes, your threat will not be great initially. But you always focus on staying alive as a tank, instead of worrying about having 600, 900 spell power and doing an insane amount of threat on targets. One case I can bring up is what happened when Classic launched. Now, different classes, but here's something. When Classic launched, there was an enormous rush by a lot of warriors, a lot of tanks, to go Fury Prot. And it ended up going badly. Why is that? Well, because Fury Prot, although it does a significant amount of threat, it's fun to play, it allows you to also farm as the tank, to do some farming as a tank, so that's always beneficial. Although Fury Prot is great from those perspectives, what really ended up happening for those hero tanks, because they focused on their threat instead of the survivability, is they ended up in front of an enormous number of bosses, Galamag, Magmadar, Gar, etc., where their survivability was awful. And they would either die, or they'd have to switch to a shield, which completely nullifies the benefit that Fury Prot has over Deep Prot. Whereas some other tanks, including myself and the people I was playing with at the time, in the first few weeks, before we really started getting MC gear and all that kind of stuff, myself and other tanks, we went Deep Prot, we had much better survivability, And we were also doing very similar fret on many boss encounters. Not all of them, of course. In situations where you didn't have to use a shield as Fury Prot where you could survive, it was obviously they were doing better. But in many situations, they had to use a shield, and Deep Prot tanks end up in a better position. Now, of course, this, Warrior versus Paladin, different situation. But the point I'm making here, don't rush for fret on week 1, week 2. Get gear, get comfortable with survivability, be concerned about how the situation is for your healers, then worry about fret. Then worry about keeping the warlocks from taking your mobs when you're AoE tanking. That's the best mentality you can have as a tank. Survivability first, staying the fuck alive, then fret second. Always make that decision. And always play like that. So, with that in mind, however, once you are more comfortable with fret, once any survival issues are dealt with, you can make some choices to go for more fret at the loss of survivability and maybe even at the loss of some certain flexibility. So one of the things you can do is you dump the 5 points from Ardent Defender, so you lose your passive shield wall, and then you spend 3 points in Pursuit of Justice, and then you get 3 points in Crusade. You're still left with 2 points, so you can spend those 2 points in Precision, or you can dump 1 point from Pursuit of Justice, get Improved Seal of Crusader. It doesn't matter what you go for, but the important thing is you get Crusade. Crusade is 3% damage against humanoids, demon, undead, and elementals. So the vast majority of enemies in the game, you get 3% more damage, you get 3% more fret. And that is a way for you to just increase your fret on a single target by a decent amount, while only losing a passive shield wall that only kicks in when you're low HP. This is only something you should do once you're completely comfortable with your survivability, and you may want to go back to Ardent Defender if you're trying to do insane AoE pulls and trying to survive them. So just be aware of that. It is a trade-off that you may want to make. Then on top of that, in certain specialized situations, like say tanking the Muru adds, tanking on Muru, that's the only case where I had to use it, you can dump Avenger Shield and you can go for Sanctity Aura. This is 10% damage. But this is both a flexibility loss in terms of range threat, because you're going to lose Avenger Shield, your burst threat is going to go down, you won't be able to have those benefits. And Avenger Shield is also something you can use during a boss fight, because you can have a swing timer for a boss, and typically you'll have like 2 seconds between boss swings, and you can cast an Avenger Shield between them. Now, it's very mana intensive, and you're also losing your weapon sync, so you're losing your Seal of Righteousness threat, so it's not, it may not necessarily be all that great, but it is a loss of flexibility and a loss of burst threat, which is significant. Never underestimate how significant that is. But on top of that, by going for Sanctity Aura, you do obviously gain a threat benefit from having Sanctity, but you can't use Devotion Aura. So you're losing 800 armor. You typically don't want to go for Improved Devo Aura, but you are going to lose your own Devotion Aura. You're going to have less survivability. It isn't significant. It's like, what, 1-2% damage reduction from it? Around thereabouts, between 1 to 2%. So it may not sound significant, but it is a loss in survivability. And that's something you should be aware of. This is a very specialized build that you should only really use when you care about your sustained AoE threat. Or when you're about your AoE threat. It's literally an AoE threat build. It's not necessarily that significant for a single target, especially with the loss of Avenger Shield, but it's really useful when you're tanking a lot of mobs together. So in Hyjol, maybe a Kael'thas, Muru, all that kind of stuff. I personally only really ever used it on Muru, and it was very useful there. It was pretty much mandatory to use it there, but outside of that, I never saw the point of going for it. And that's pretty much all there is really to say on this particular subject. Quasine here signing out. Hope you found this helpful. Hope it is a benefit to any of you that are interested in playing a production Paladin. Always remember this. Survival first, then fret. And always keep your options open. Be flexible when you're going for these kind of talents. Stay tuned for more, everyone.